Well, before anyone thinks it's just me by myself, Dr. Leroy is here. We're just making sure that nobody is trying to steal his Wi-Fi connection. So we're going to get that sorted. If you are live, do say hello. I know it's been a minute since I've done a live. When did I do my last one? Second week of December? Welcome to 2021. Lord have mercy. Okay, fine, I can hear him in the background, so all good. So yes, do send me your comments. As you know, I do get carried away in the conversation, but I am going to do my best. Oh, hello, Abigail, I've got friends. As you know I don't like to start properly until I know I've got friends. Hi, Abigail. Oh, we've got Arkansas in. Hello, right. We have got friends. Look at this. Lots of lovely people. Lots of people. Hi, Kay. Lots of look. Oh, I've got somebody new. Hi, Leslie. Okay, welcome to my live. You're in for a treat. You're in for a treat. So as I did start waffling to myself, but I think it was probably me, so nobody heard me. Leroy is here. We're just making sure nobody steals his Wi-Fi. So while I wait for him to join, well, listen, welcome to 2021. What a mad start to the year. I know it's been a minute since I've been on a live, so welcome, hello, and thank you so much for joining. Now, in the spirit of honesty, as we know, because you're all my friends, so I feel like I can talk to you. So, I made this very big deal about doing my last live, second week of December. I was going to switch off digital, chill out, eat food, just enjoy the Christmas thing. Well, I am a statistic because I did catch COVID-19 2 days before Christmas. It was not a good look. So for anybody who has had the virus, is still going through the virus, I wish you a speedy recovery because it is not good. Oh my, listen, from when I can't smell anything, that's when you know there was a problem. Do you know what I mean? So didn't eat much, didn't do much. So, but I'm back, bar a little bit of coughing. So you will see me mute a few times. I'm as all right as I can be. So welcome. And can I welcome Leroy Logan? Leroy, there are a lot of people who are very excited to see you here. I had messages and all sorts.
All right, thank you.
Messages and all sorts.
You're making an old man very happy.
Oh, stop it. You've got a lot of fans out there. So a lot of fans. People hold you in affection. So listen, I titled this. No, wait, first off, how can I not show this? I know you've got your copy in the background, Leroy, but listen, let me just do I'm just going to do slowly so everyone can see.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you.
Bookmarks. There's quite a few things. I know I'm not going to be able to get through everything, but I'm going to hold it in my hands because I will need it. So I titled this live, oh gosh, doing the fight from within, basically. And I'm going to let you tell your story, Leroy, but I just want to context for everybody else why I basically slid into your DMs before Christmas. I was like, hi, Leroy. So how do you feel about coming to talk to me? I'm going to push my luck. And then you replied back and said, Shireen, push your luck. I'd love to join you. So thank you. And I wanted to help people who are trying to fight the good fight and, trying to make changes within their organizations to get them to actually be specific about racism, not kind of brush it under the carpet and, dilute it to talk about belonging and diversity and inclusion, but let's call it what it is and let's be specific. Now, you have had an incredible career in the Met Police and since after, not only with your book, and then you've got Steve McQueen taking your life story and getting John Boyega to play you, which I'm sure was an experience. But I think there is so much in the work that you've done that I think people will just find extremely valuable. Hence the popularity of this live, I think, is testament to that. So I'm going to shut up now because, I've got plenty of things to ask you. But imagine people don't know who you are, Leroy. Could you just tell us a little bit of your story?
Well, born in London in the late 50s to Jamaican parents who came over in the Windrush generation. and I was fortunate that during my primary school stage, I went to Jamaica, and I lived in Spanish Town for a few years from 62 to 66, which was a masterclass in identity, to know my culture and my background. I came back, finished my education, and I thought my life was going to be a scientist because I did a science degree, and I was working in the Royal Free Hospital in Hampstead in North London, Northwest London. And yeah, everything was set. And all of a sudden the calling of policing hit me in a very, very strange way, when the last thing I wanted to do was to be a police officer because of the experience I had as a youngster, even in secondary school, coming out band practice. I got stopped by police in full uniform on the borders of the school, and with my trumpet case in one hand and my satchel in the other, and they still said I was suspicious and I was worthy to be stopped under the sus law. And my father was not happy at that either. So I grew up really, well, to say I hated police was a bit extreme, but I didn't like them at all. And I knew the importance of police because I've been to Jamaica and I saw black cops, black teachers, black lawyers, whatever. But I couldn't see why white police officers were so draconian with us, and with people who looked like me, growing up in London. And I knew the same was happening all over the UK. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell, really.
And so what prompted you then to get into policing? And then if you can just tell a little bit of your story from being in the police, because you were the first chair of the Black Police Association, which I believe, was it started in 1990?
Well, the London BPA started informally in 1990, and
Right.
we formalized in 94, and then we set up the national BPA in 98, which I was the first chair of,
Right.
the national BPA. But yeah, the calling actually happened when I was doing science research at the Royal Free, and the leisure area, which included a bar, a gym, swimming pool, even a sports hall, attracted a lot of other public servants. So you get ambulance drivers there, paramedics, and also police officers. But because they're in their sports gear, I didn't know who was who. And it's only after a number of months I used to meet these guys in the gym, play football, etc. And then they shared with me that they were local officers from Hampstead. So I saw the human side of these officers, which offset a lot of the negativity I had for officers who used to stop and search me under the sus law. So I was encouraged by that. And they started to say, well, Leroy, you're a very outgoing person, and the Met Police are looking for officers of different backgrounds. It'd be great if you would join. I said, no, I'm fine what I'm doing. And then my boss was doing my annual appraisal, and he said to me, Leroy, love the work you're doing, but I can't see you being a scientist for the next 30, 40 years. So I said, what do you think I could be doing? He said, oh, they're doing a recruitment drive in the Met Police. Have you ever thought of joining the police? I said, do I look like a racist to you? And he was, he said, well, listen, give it a try, or just do research. And so those local officers who I was meeting in the bar and that started to take me on drive rounds. So I started to get a taste of it. And, at the same time, my fiance, Gretel, who's still my wife all these years later, said, maybe that's something you should do. Because she came from Nigeria, so she had a similar sort of approach to black police officers, in a similar way in which I saw in Jamaica. Because one of the other things that used to remind me of policing over there was you know, the blue and the red seam officers, and looking very, very athletic. And I thought, well, you know, it is a laudable profession. And I remember when I was doing my degree, I was walking from one end of the campus to another, and I saw a police officer in uniform sitting in a marked police car. And I thought, and this was in the 70s, you know, while I was doing my degree, and late 70s. And I said, wow, what a role model. He's a pretty brave guy. So all these images came back at me, and, you know, people were encouraging. And I think the final thing was my best friend, Lee John, who of Imagination fame, his mother used to be a community liaison officer. And she was saying to me, Leroy, again, I can't see you being in a lab for the next 20, 30 years. And I told her that people encouraged me to join the police. And she said, yeah, you should do that, because we need a more reflective organization, because you've been working with officers and majority are white. So it was a culmination of various things. And I was really pleased that in the end, you know, I made the decision. But it was a tough one, because I was getting rejection from a lot of my friends. I used to say, if you ever want to reduce your Christmas card list by 99%, join the Met, or join any police service. And it was a tough one, but, you know, I'm glad I did it.
And so, listen, I want it. So now I kind of warmed you up nicely before we get in. We're going to get into the meat and potatoes of this, as we say here.
Yeah.
1980s in London, in Brixton, we saw the Brixton Riots, and we saw that as a obviously I was a youngster, because I was born in 1981. So obviously I'm recounting from what I know as opposed to experiencing it. But one of the reasons why I think it was critical for a lot of things, but on reflection, when I've been doing my reading and research, just on kind of not only so much the origins of racism, but the experience of racism in the UK as a distinctive to what's going on in the US, because I would almost say we probably know more about US racism than we do about the UK, because for lots of different reasons. But one of the things is that the media does not portray some of those experiences, and therefore it's not turned into documentaries, films, you know, not to the same extent that it is in the UK. What do you think that the 1980s, you know, the riots that were happening in Brixton and then Manchester, Leeds and other parts of London, why do you think that was such a turning point for, dare I say, race relations? I don't have a better term, but you know what I mean. When we started to take this idea of racism a lot more seriously at an institutional level.
Well, I think any sort of uprising of that nature is normally the voice of the oppressed. And it's people who feel that their issues are not being addressed. In fact, they feel the sense of frustration of institutional racism, whether it's through policing, through education, through housing, whatever it may be. And they, in the end, thrash out in an uprising, which can be hijacked by criminal elements. But initially, those sort of issues, similar to 2011 with the Tottenham riots resulting from the Mark Duggan killing, again, it was just a sense, it was the light that ignited the blue touch paper to explode in that uprising, because people felt oppressed and frustrated. And I'm not condoning violence or any form of criminality, but I can understand and empathize how people get a sense of frustration, because I myself experienced it myself. So I cannot discount the fact that it's sometimes inevitable that these things are going to happen, because you hear it in the community and you try and build bridges and not barriers, and certain people have a very myopic view, and that's unfortunately what we find in the police. They have a very narrow view of the cultural nuances of the various communities, in particular the Black community, and they don't realize the day-to-day policing has an impact on how people trust police or not, as the case may be. And trust and confidence is a cornerstone of police legitimacy. Until officers, especially at the senior level, and have the ethical leadership to control their officers and understand the more trusting a community is, the better and safer and more resilient that community will be. Because, as I said, trust is the cornerstone of police legitimacy.
So I just want to, can I go to your book? Can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Go to your book, right. So I just marked a bit in here. Let me see if I can find it. Just give me a minute. So this was talking about the birth of the Black Business Association. And I just want to read just for everybody, because I was struck particularly when I read this bit. You could have been talking today, Leroy, when you talked about the experiences of the Black police officers sharing about how they felt about the police force and how that mirrored how they felt the treatment of Black people were in general society. So I just want to read this little bit, and then I'm just going to ask for your almost observations and whether you are seeing parallels to what we were talking about 20 years ago to actually what's happening within organisations today. Over the following 2 days, we opened up our veins and bled out the pain we suffered in the hostile environment of the occupational culture. One officer told how whenever he would radio his colleagues, they would make monkey noises back at him. Every N-word we'd ever been subjected to while at work, be it in the staff canteen or on the football pitch, came out. For everyone who spoke, the experience was brave and soul-searching. Typically for me, I wasn't going to go through this process and then go back to business as usual. I didn't see Bristol as just a series of seminars. For me, it was a call to action. Can you just talk people through what was going on at that stage with the Black Business, the Black Police Association?
Well, basically, this is before the BPA was launched, 94. But in 1990, the Met Police realised that they're getting officers in, but they're not staying. You were 4 to 5 times more likely to leave the organisation if you're Black than you're white in the first 2 years. So they set up a series of seminars where a lot of the Black officers, majority of them, there's about 200 of us at that stage, were jumped on a bus from Scotland Yard down to across to Bristol, and we spent 2 days there in these seminars. And as your section, as you read out that section, it reminded me of how our expectations were so high that something was going to be done by us expressing the hostile environment we were having to go through, and we believe we're going to have some changes. Unfortunately, that report, which I was part of the working group to draw up, just ended up decorating people's shelves, or maybe just ended up in their bins, basically, because they didn't in any way apply any of the recommendations. But we kept on meeting informally. We used to have these Bristol reunions, even though we were meeting in London. And we found it attracted so many other people outside policing, Black lawyers, Black teachers, Black doctors, nurses, you name it, and firefighters. So we were touched by that. And as a result of that, we decided to formalize ourselves. And we actually had our founder member meeting in April 93, the same month that Stephen Lawrence was killed. And our lives sort of went parallel with them, because when we then launched in 94, we had a lot of people involved in the Stephen Lawrence case attending our launch. And then, of course, we gave evidence, myself and 2 other members gave evidence to the Macpherson inquiry that was looking into the death of Stephen Lawrence. And we own the recommendations that subsequently were published in February 99. And by this time, we'd launched the national BPA at the end of 98, just after we gave evidence to the Macpherson inquiry. And I was the first chair, so I was able to really own those recommendations nationally and not just London, because those recommendations impacted on policing across the country. And and not just around the recruitment, retention and progression piece, but also about service delivery, stop and search, building bridges with the community instead of barriers, and how you get more accountability and transparency. So there was various things that we saw coming out of it, like independent advisors group, family liaison officers, hate crime was defined on the statute books, and we saw senior investigating officers being trained into race and equality matters, and right across the country there was community and race relations training. So there was a massive change in the culture, and I think what kept the police service focused around this was the independent oversight brought by the Stephen Lawrence Steering Group, and that was initially chaired by Jack Straw, who was the Home Secretary at the time, and you'd have Neville and Doreen Lawrence and other ministries, policing, education, health, and staff associations, including me as the chair of the National Black Police Association. Because what gets measured gets done, and the steering group was monitoring progress right across the country, and we saw some phenomenal improvements in the first 10 years.
Can you, I've got a question to go back to the Stephen Lawrence bit, but what sort of improvements did you see in comparison to where you were when you started, to kind of when you, if you think about almost to the point that you retired?
Well, as I said, the first 10 years with the oversight of the Stephen Lawrence Steering Group, we saw the black and minority ethnic officers at that time in 1999, when the report was published, it was 2% in the Met, and then we saw it go for the first 10 years go from 2 to 12%. So you start to see the police start to be more reflective of the community. Well, then we'd start to see trust and confidence was improving, because people's day-to-day experience of policing was improving, and as a result of that, we're getting more information of and targeting the right sort of people. Now, it wasn't perfect, but at least we were getting a monitoring of progress and not just in London, but right across the country. And I remember so many times that if people strayed off, whether it's a chief constable or any of he or she's team, they would be brought back into place. But unfortunately, in 2010, when the Tory government took over and austerity kicked in, race and equality matters were sort of kicked off the agenda. In fact, they were kicked out the management board, because the monitoring of progress was now given to each chief constable. So it's like someone gives you the answers to a test and say, mark your own homework. You've got to make yourself look good. And that's what we found. Officers were not really understanding that things were getting worse. And we were losing frontline officers through austerity, your safer neighbour teams, your safer schools officers. And then the Met Police then reverted into firefighting type policing, just reacting from one incident to another, not getting into the prevention and the problem solving and key interventions. And I suppose that's what inspired us in the BPA. We set up a charitable arm. I was the chair, set up the charitable trust in the late 90s, early O's, and I then was chair of the London BPA, and we developed a community engagement program, and a key element was the a leadership program for young people, which we now call Young Leaders for Safer Cities, and how we can assist those young people to know their rights, responsibilities, how they can develop positive peer-to-peer mentoring, and to change their environment and not become a product of it. And we realized that we had to occupy that space, and we're still occupying that space now, 20 years later. In fact, that program is 20 years this year from, understanding we had to have an active role in that space, where unfortunately frontline policing was lost. It was enforcement driven type policing. We knew the importance of, like, as I said, building bridges and not barriers.
Can I almost flip the lens internally for a minute? So if we put the policing aspect to one side and think about the Met Police as an organisation like any other organisations, one of the I'm not going to say the biggest problem, because there are many problems in this space for anybody trying to, you know, make their organisation more equitable, but also anti-racist. So there is that focus there. Is how did you deal with the fact that potentially not all of the workforce, so thinking about the white police officers, were happy / supportive of what you were trying to do? Because this is still the barriers that we're facing within organisations today. So you've got possibly an executive sponsor, you've got a DEI specialist or chief people officer who's saying, right, we're going to do this because it's important. You've got black colleagues who are saying this is massively important because I can't carry on like this. But everyone else is still in the space of, well, I don't even think racism is such a big deal. And, you know, why are we still talking about it? Why is there the focus on this? Did you have that problem when you started off, and how did you navigate that?
Well, pre-McPherson, we had a lot of that, and you know, we used to get pushback on why do we need a Black Police Association, and we said, and they said, well, you know, the Federation is supposed to represent your views, and we said, well, if they were representing our views, why would we be seeing the need to form? Because the way in which we've had to deal with this hostile environment in terms of recruit, retention, and progression, and we realized that we had to speak up on behalf of ourselves and the Black community that we represented. And it wasn't just Black police officers, it was police staff members as well, which was the uniqueness of the BPA. And invariably, police staff members didn't have the voice as police officers. So coming together gave us that real critical mass of Black personnel to make changes. But as I said, McPherson was a watershed of change, which we owned and we pushed through. But you also need political will, so that when we had Jack Straw working with us and the subsequent Labour Home Secretaries, we had that leverage. And in a lot of ways, police officers were in fear of us. So even the Federation tried to push back and tried to say, well, we don't need a BPA. Institutional racism is no longer necessary. We knew we had the backing of the politicians to hold chief constables to account. So we were like the ambassadors of change within the organisation, honest brokers to say it as it is. But when you lose that through, you know, the change of government, change of emphasis, austerity kicks in, then there is that greater sense of isolation. You don't feel that you're being supported, even if you challenge the organisation as a critical friend, not as just being adversarial just for the sake of it. So we made it clear that we need the support of the senior leadership. And unfortunately, if the senior leadership is not being held to account, their natural default is not to work with staff associations. They work with the Federation, who fuel that negative culture. And that's still the case today. But what's encouraged me over the last year, unfortunately, through the lynching of George Floyd, and which brought a tear to my eye, because, you know, that officer had the same, more or less swore the same sort of oath to protect and serve as I did, and how he used really gruesome means of his need to kill that man. And I think the Black Lives Matter movement has given so many organizations like the BPA and other staff associations to say, listen, we need to regroup, we need to collaborate, we need to re-emphasize the need for change, and we can't just leave it to the politicians or the police or any other organization. It needs to be people power, and young people have really stepped up. I've seen it with our leadership program, and our young people who've come out of that program, still doing it till this very day. It's now called Voice of the Youth and Genuine Empowerment. And we work with those young people, and they are more socially politically aware. They want to do things, as I said, change their environment and just not be a victim of it. And so they're really pushing through. They're part of this whole movement of change through the Black Lives Matter. And we might not agree with everything they do, but what I like about it is young people feeling a desire to make that change and to say that we're not going to put up with this anymore. we're going to call you to account. And that helps the staff associations in each of the organizations to say, yep, we're going to step up. So for me, I've been really encouraged by that over the last year. I hope it will continue.
And if you had, let's imagine, I managed somehow to get like 10 CEOs in a virtual. So imagine we had 10 faces all here. And thinking about your experience that you've had with the National Black Police Association, your experiences, you know, rising to the top, I suppose, within, and knowing what you know now since we've seen what's happened with George Floyd, and again at the beginning of this year, like, what would you say to them if they were still getting splinters because they're sat on the fence about doing something about this, you know, and addressing this within their organisations? What would you say to them, Leroy?
Well, I would appeal to their understanding of the role that they have, and that the form of service they have to provide, and the ethical leadership that's necessary to ensure that their organisation is fit for purpose, and doing that self-inventory which is required now, not just to say passively we're not racist, but if you're not racist, we'll prove it. And also it's about being proactive and how you challenge racism within your organization, within individuals. So it's not like passively saying I'm not racist, but you allow microaggression or even overt racism to continue, and as a result of that it perpetuates. So silence is complicity, and making sure that there's a clear statement of intent that yes, we're not perfect, but we are aspiring to be the best we can be, and we need to work with the community. We understand the importance of being more open and transparent, and being accountable, and actually offer ways in which you can build that into your equality and inclusion frameworks to make sure that diversity is celebrated. So there's various ways in which, even just changing the narrative and the way in which you operate, to ensure that people say, oh, hold on here, this looks different. This must be, let's look at this closely, and build, you know, that sort of trust that needs to be fostered. Because as I said, that's the cornerstone of legitimacy of most organizations. If people trust your product, trust your service, they will work with you. So for CEOs, it should be as simple as that. Don't overcomplicate it. I remember the appealing principles that we were taught in the foundation course as a police officer, and it's based on Sir Robert Peel's speech when he set up the Met Police in 1829, and he said the police are the public and the public are the police. And it's as simple as that. You don't have to overcomplicate it. There is that contract between the police and the community. Now that you have that same contract with your public, whether it's a service or a product or the way in which you engage with them, there needs to be that level playing field, and that sense of working with people and not talking down to them, and really engaging with them at a level where they feel respected. And especially with policing, when you're carrying out stop and searches, etc., treat people with respect and dignity. Be proportionate. Be legal in what you're doing. Make sure it's intelligence-based. All of these things just can be done, and you can't allow the rogue cops or the emboldened officers who think they're a lot more able to voice or even act out their racism, and especially since Brexit, you know, hate crime went through the roof. All that emboldenedness of that right-wing rhetoric has to be addressed openly, and saying that we're not going to allow it to happen.
And can I, before we go to questions, so if anyone has any questions, start answering them before we finish. But I just want to go back to the Stephen Lawrence inquiry and the McPherson report, because up until that point, and you can correct me or anyone else can correct me if you think I'm wrong with this, but we're still really focused about racism being individual behaviours, so being called the N-word, you know, or overt racial discrimination. And also within the UK, we had, you know, on the back of more people from the West Indies coming in from Windrush, and then this whole backlash then to be like, oh, you know, all these black people, they're taking our jobs, they're taking our houses, you know, Then we had the rhetoric from the government a little bit about, you know, trying to keep a lid on immigration, and, you know, I think the Stephen Lawrence inquiry was a turning point for people to start to understand institutional racism. Because am I correct? And is that the first time we use the phrase here?
Over here, yeah, but it's been used previously in the US.
Yeah. And for those who are still struggling with this idea, can you just, using that as an example, just explain to people what that actually meant and why it was such a key part of the inquiry that then informed on what you did within the Met Police going forward?
Yeah, well, institutional racism is not pointing the finger at individual officers, because a lot of the times officers will say, well, I'm not racist. Well, I'm not concerned if you're racist or not. I just want to make sure you're professional and you're objective in how you carry out your execute your duties, and you are proportionate and legal in what you do and accountable. So that's the first thing we used to say. And the institutionalized element of it is when the institution itself has policies and practices that have a disproportionate impact, whether it's internally through recruitment, retention, and progression, or externally in terms of service delivery. So stop and search, when you're 10 times more likely to be stopped if you're black than you're white. And that form of racial profiling is a form of institutional racism, because the organization has seen it being a problem for decades, even before the first Race Relations Act in the 60s, and they continue to make excuses for not addressing it. And we saw improvements after the McPherson inquiry with the independent oversight from the Stephen Lawrence Steering Group, which to improve it, which made significant improvements. And we didn't see that disproportionality. And officers would say, oh, we can't stop that many people, and so crime goes up. There's never been a correlation between stop and search and crime going up. It's all a fallacy. And when I hear officers saying, well, in my experience, well, I did 30 years, and I know that you can be very targeted and you do less stops, and you can get more of an impact because you're stopping the people who are up to no good and grooming people into that life of antisocial behavior and crime, and maybe leading into gangs. It's like I do it like a football analogy with, and I'm not a Tottenham supporter, but I actually admire Mourinho, the coach, because he doesn't go by how many shots on goal you put, it's how many go in the net. It's not a question of, all right, 70% possession of the ball. He just wants to make sure that the 30% you have, you make it count, whether it's counter, fast counter action and reacting to, the press. So that's what it means for an organization. It's not a scattergun approach. It is a very intelligence-based, objective way of operating. And so you don't disrupt people going about their lawful business if it's policing, or you don't exclude more black youngsters from school because you don't have that cultural intelligence to understand when they're playing up, or you set the ball rolling by detentions just for minor things, whereas the white student doesn't get that same of disproportionate impact, similar to what we saw in the police. I was trial by media through an investigation about a trumped up hotel charge, and it was quite clear white officers were subject to that, and it was an admin error. When they've done that, they don't even get words of advice. But I got trial by media, and the whole sort of difficulties that went with it for my family. My 10-year-old, my youngest, who was 10 at the time, was saying, "Dad, are you going to prison?" Because he really thought there was a real problem here. And these are sort of things that people need to understand. You've got to be held to account, because organizations invariably are not that good of holding themselves to account. There needs some peer review. It's just like this COVID vaccine. Everyone's very concerned about how quick this thing's been applied and can it be tested. But having been a scientist, I know what peer review is done to ensure, even though it's been fast tracked, and it's amazing what they've done as within a year to get a vaccine that
Mm.
I'll be the first to go in the queue, because I know the checks and balances that go in, and I think it's my science background.
Oh, we've lost Dr. Leroy for a second, but I actually wanted to jump to some questions.
Yeah.
Oh, you back? Fabulous, fabulous. Yeah. I can't see you, but I can hear you.
Oh, right. Okay. I can hear you. I don't know why you can't see me.
Oh, you might want to leave and come. Maybe try and leave and come back.
Okay, I'll do that.
Yeah, should do that, and I'm going to put up some questions. Oh, look, it's back to me. So, firstly, thank you everyone who wished me well with my COVID-19 trials and tribulations. Hi, Kathy. I just want to show this comment that you said here. How can we expect organisations to manage itself against wrongs committed within? That's the problem, because they're not held to account in the same way that our public services are to a point. I actually don't know the answer to this. If anyone can help give some views to Kathy, I don't have an answer to this, because, you know, I spend a lot of my time trying to encourage executive leadership teams to get off the fence because they're still feeling very uncomfortable about tackling this. And then even when they do start to tackle it, sometimes they're so distracted by making sure it looks good that it's not actually having the impact that it's meant to have. But then who is the person, or who are the people that says to them, do you know what you're doing is not it? Do you know what I mean? I don't know. I've got no idea. I'm still, you know, work in progress on that one. Oh, is Dr. Leroy back? Oh, he's back. Fabulous. There you go. We were just talking about this comment. Now, somebody, I'm just going to jump down to, hold on, I'm just going to try and find this. Vernal, this is a good question for you, actually, Leroy. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I see the point that they're making, but I've realised over the last 10 years that policing has gone back to a pre-Macpherson era, and that's why Macpherson, I think, is still relevant today, because it's been like the first 10 years from 99 to 2009, 10 steps forward. Since then, from 2010 to 2019, there's been 10 steps back. And so over the last year or so, policing has, I believe, has gone back to that pre-Macpherson era, the whole look and feel of it. So I am really seeing that Macpherson has just as much relevance as it was then, because the themes are exactly the same. You know, if you really understand the importance of policing, and as I said before, what is the cornerstone of police legitimacy, trust, and confidence, then you will treat people with more respect and dignity. When I used to be a superintendent in Hackney, one of the most challenging boroughs in the country, I would say to them, every time you stop someone, that could be a potential witness for a future crime. So if you treat them roughshod, especially young people, especially young black men, and you're bullying them, you're applying handcuffs when you shouldn't, you're very intolerant and very sarcastic with it, then you're more than likely, when that person may have witnessed a robbery or a murder, they're less likely to speak to you as an officer because of the way you treated them maybe days or weeks earlier. So, and in this day of social media, and it's not so much what happens to them personally, it's sometimes what they've seen on Facebook or any other social platform, and they think, well, if you're going to treat me like that, I'll have nothing to do with you. And that's what we're happening at the moment. And unfortunately, and I've seen this with our youngsters at Voyage Youth, they're reasonable, but they don't have no trust in police. And a lot of the times they say they're over-policed and under-protected. They don't feel that the police are for them. And in fact, they feel the police are against them. So these are sort of things that need to be addressed. But that's just an example of what was happening before Macpherson. And here we are playing it out 20 years later. So that's why Macpherson is just important. And another example is Cressida Dick, the commissioner. And I've known Cres for 20 odd years. And I think certain things she said, not only about institutional racism, is inappropriate and unhelpful, but even actually saying they're no longer going to investigate the Stephen Lawrence murder. Because remember, there's 2 suspects that haven't been put before the court. And saying that you're not going to investigate and it's going to be shelved, basically. And I made a tweet that said very clearly that it's a crazy decision. You didn't have to do it. You didn't have to make it public, even if you did do it. And the timing of the Black Lives Matter movement, why would you do that? And it's either you don't care or you just don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And so these are the sort of things I believe. Macpherson is a watershed. It's a corner. I think it was a tipping point of policing. And I think for many years, people will still see Macpherson as that because it was a legally driven, government-sponsored inquiry. It wasn't, and no disrespect to other inquiries, very few. It is almost like a royal commission.
Yeah, it was serious. It was serious.
You can't have it. Only a royal commission is more serious than the Macpherson inquiry, and that's why it still has relevance and importance.
Yeah, no, and I think just I kind of hear what you're saying, Werner, but I think look, I don't want to say to anybody, read Leroy's book, but honestly, when you're reading his book, the similarities between what Leroy talks about in terms of what was going on in the Met Police and the experiences of Black police officers and support staff is exactly the same as what we're experiencing now. So to some extent, it isn't, I don't feel like it's not about having to apologize for what happened. It goes back to when you understand what institutional racism is, when you understand what systemic racism is, you can go beyond just thinking about it in terms of people's individual behaviours, because I think that's part and parcel why we're here today. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and the fact that these systemic failures were not developed overnight, it's over decades, maybe even centuries, from slavery, imperialism, colonialism, and how legislation has been manipulated to be draconian against minority groups. The SUS law was a law of the Met Police Act for people who were obstructing the highway and being unlawful in antisocial behaviour type thing. But how they spun it, then it became a tool against Black people, and they were racially profiled. And I remember when we were youngsters, we used to call the police the thought police, because they could arrest you on suspicion that you're about to commit an arrestable offence.
Yes.
So you must be reading my mind that I'm going to commit this offence. So, and all right, it got repealed by the Police and Criminal Evidence Act in 1984, but still, you might change behaviour. You can legislate the changes in behaviour, but as Martin Luther King says, can you legislate attitudes being changed? And that's the issue. The attitudinal issue is just the same as it was now. Sorry, it is the same now as it was 30 odd years ago when I joined. And until we get a real understanding of that, how it plays itself out, and people are quite smart in how they hide behind their racist tendencies. But what my fear is, so many officers feel emboldened that they can come out and say so many things. So you hear in politicians, even in the US, what's been happening with that siege on the Capitol building last Wednesday. That is unheard of. And it's because people feel emboldened to do these things because they got conspirator in chief and white supremacists in chief in the Oval Office. That's the reason why they could even think of doing that, much less do it.
And that's the thing. I mean, I did share some posts that got some very interesting opinions on that. So now that you've mentioned it, we're going to talk about that for a minute. In that, one of the things that struck me when I watched that, and I'm conscious that I have a lot of US friends watching, is it was the sense of entitlement that is not only a logical thing to do, but they're allowed to do it. I can't describe that. When I watched it, and I just thought, as Black people, and Leroy, you know this, we can't even get into a supermarket sometimes without having a security person come to follow us. Never mind be able to storm a building that is meant to be protected, right?
Look at how Black Lives Matter was policed last summer, when they decided they want to do a peaceful protest in the same buildings. They weren't even given an opportunity to be on the perimeter of that building, because they had the National Guard all in the balaclavas and the visors and the long guns. They were just standing there, right? Whereas we then saw, remember, that rally before they stormed the Capitol building was instigated by politicians.
Yes.
And so you had congressmen and women, you had senators, you even had the president himself, and then you had Rudy Giuliani, his henchman in chief, talking about combat, and a representative talking about kick ass and take names and all that sort. So that combative type language stirred them up. So if you're at Pennsylvania Avenue and you walk along there to the Capitol building, I've been to Washington, and you're already rallied, and then the look and feel of policing is totally different. It's just the Capitol cops, and they're in very low numbers for whatever reason. And I think there's been a complicit issue, whether it's at the top or wherever, because they've even found that certain officers has been suspended because of their very, very close association with these white supremacists, and how, you know, the QAnon and all the other conspiracy people who said the election was void, and that's, as you said, that sense of entitlement that they can take over. Now, I suppose you need to recognize the history of the US. It's been a combative history from how they settled in America and they occupied areas. They almost annihilated the native Indians, and even how they had a civil war a couple of hundred years ago. So that combative attitude
is in the DNA.
They can't help it, especially when you've got white supremacists in the Oval Office.
Right. And I think the other thing I want to say on that as well is what's really interesting in terms of some of the conversations that have been happening and some of the narratives that people have been trying, they've not really succeeded, but trying to make on this, is anytime there is what I call destructive, racist, just appalling behavior of white people, there is an attempt to link it to their class and upbringing. So you'll hear people talk about, oh yeah, but it was just those rednecks, you know, it's not indicative, it's only the exception, you know, the bad apples analogy. But then what people don't realize is there were chief executive officers in there. There were AI scientists. There were politicians. There were social media. Listen, there are regular people that will work alongside people like you and I and everybody listening in within organisations up to very senior levels. So we have to do away with this narrative of trying to brush that under the carpet almost. And this is my view. Obviously, you can chip in with, because that's the thing that gets me the most frustrated. Because you made the point earlier when you talked about your kids thinking that you were going to go to prison, because it's just this double standards, you know, that when white people do something, it can be explained away. They're exceptionists. They're not terrorists. They're people with mental health issues. They're this, they're this, they're this. But when it's black people, it's like everybody's waiting, because subconsciously we are seen as a threat. So it's just waiting for, it's almost like any poor behavior is an excuse for people to say, this is why you are where you are in society. This is why you can't get the jobs. This is why you're getting stopped by the police. You people bring it on yourself, because that same rhetoric is coming up again, even on the back of Capitol Hill, you know?
Absolutely. And I suppose, again, we can't discount slavery in this, because remember, out of all slavery colonies, the American colony was one of the largest, and it was on their patch. Whereas most slavery in the UK, or in Great Britain as it was once known, was abroad. It was mainly in the colonies, whether it's in the Caribbean or different parts of Asia or whatever. There's different forms of slavery in different parts, but it wasn't on home turf. They didn't have a whole set of slaves in the UK. So that's why extremely tough with racism, or lynching a black man for even looking at someone was not a problem. Even after slavery was dealt with, and people being dragged along by a motor vehicle, trucks, etc., was commonplace. And we know black communities were not absolutely wiped off the face of the map because of there was this sense that they were a threat for whatever reason. So we cannot take, I'm a great believer as well of when America sneezes, we in the UK catch a cold.
Correct.
So we can't even fool ourselves by saying, well, oh yeah, George Floyd never happened over here. It has happened over here.
Correct.
In 2017, there was a young man, for example, in 2017, there was a young man called Rashan Charles, and he died from, it was an avoidable death where an officer had a neck hold, and he had his hand in the young man's mouth, saying he had swallowed drugs. Well, when has an officer been trained to do that? Who says that you're skilled enough to do that? And if someone swallows something, the first person you called is a paramedic or a doctor to try and help that person and get them to the hospital if it's the easiest route. And so that young man, I don't know if anyone's seen the footage, it was almost superimposable as George Floyd. It took minutes for that young man to stop moving because of that unlawful hold of that officer. Now, that officer used a neck hold, whereas the officer in George Floyd's case used his knee. And remember, the knee is actually an act of reverence. Normally you kneel, you're having reverence to whatever, your better half, if you want to say, let's get married, or you go to church to get communion, whatever it may be. So the kneeling, and that's what Colin Kaepernick, I think, was so amazing to hear, highlighting that years earlier, linking it with police brutality, and how poignant it was that one of the worst cases of police brutality was through the officer's knee. And it was, and those other officers made no attempt to stop him or even to prevent it in the first place. So don't fool yourself that this whole emboldened attitude and this populist type of politics could easily spill over here if we don't hold it to account. And that's why I truly believe, the politicians in the US have to really step up now, with this impeachment, or whether it's the Section 25 amendment to get Trump out of office, or even, dare I say it, Trump decides he wants to go. But there needs to be a statement to say this cannot be condoned. And I would like to think, America, it might look really bad, especially with COVID and the rate of deaths over there. They can come out of 2021 a lot better position than they entered it.
No, I agree, and like I say to everybody, we got our own challenges and obstacles here, within the UK, and we have to pay close attention and also look at what's going on in our own backyard, because there's a lot of things happening within organisations in terms of how Black colleagues are being treated and silenced or ostracised for speaking out now, because there's a bit of retaliation going on. That means there's still a lot of work to be done. Back to your original point about accountability,
Yep.
So no, you're absolutely right. So listen, I'm conscious of the time. I promised you I was not going to go over, Leroy, so I'm going to stick to it. Now, obviously, I'm just going to do this one more time. I always do the wrong way. Sorry, when I do this, look. I always do the wrong way. Right, here's Dr. Leroy's book. I hope everybody can see.
Yeah.
So I would, obviously, I can plug it for you, Leroy. I know it's some people like, I can't plug my own book. Well, I'm going to plug it for you. So please go and look up Dr. Leroy. Buy his book if you're interested at all. Honestly, I'm telling you, the parallels are crazy. But it's inspirational, and there's some things that are helpful. I just found it helpful because, I need as much help as I can get out here in these streets, Leroy. Do you know what I mean? So this is why I'm looking at people like you. I'm looking at, all the people who have done the work and who are still doing the work. So, I just want to say thank you, for making this your life's work in terms of serving the public in whatever capacity, that you've done it in so many different ways. I want to say thank you. I'm pleased and gratified. I don't know whether you feel the same thing now you're getting all this attention, but even, you know, having Steve McQueen take your story, you know, and have John Boyega play you, so more people, you know, can start to go, who is this Leroy? You know, I think is amazing, and I think you'll be busy for a long time. So I'm lucky I got you. I know I'm lucky. I'm very blessed.
No, as I said, you know, I like people that are very genuine with what they're doing, and that's why I want to commend you, Shireen, for your approach and your honesty, and you got my attention to the extent that, you know, we've had a really good conversation. All I would say is, you know, the struggle continues. I'm not going to be complacent to think, you know, I'm all right. It's far. Listen, as long as there's injustice, I'm not going to sit back. So if you want to check out my website, leroylogan.com, you will see what I'm doing. Even on Twitter, Leroy Logan 999. You know, I'm still, you know, in the mix. I know the importance of speaking truth to power, and I've got relatives in the US, and you know, I take a real interest in US politics and the whole power dynamics. And I just want to say I'm so pleased that Kamala Harris is going to be the first Black female vice president, and, you know, potentially a president in the making. And I really think that there's some really encouraging signs that things are moving the right direction. So, as I said, I don't want my grandchildren to go through the injustices that my children's generation or my generation or even my parents' generation have gone through. So the struggle continues, and you know, I thank you very much for us having this conversation.
No, I am very blessed to have you. Thank you. I'm going to apologize to everybody because I'm going to get cussed. I know I own the cussing, because you know what I'm like with comments, but I told you I was going to get into it and I, you know, got distracted. So apologies. I am actually going to spend half an hour afterwards. So I'm going to go and try and reply to as many people as possible in the comments. Thank you everyone for tuning in. I am back next Tuesday at 6 o'clock GMT time with Joel. Now listen. I know you think this conversation was good, right? Joel is the author of a book called America's Unholy Ghost. So, you know, like, nobody ever wants to talk about politics and religion and race. So Joel was like, sod that, I'm going to write a whole book on it. And let me tell you, it's fascinating. The book is fascinating. So I'm going to be having a conversation with him from the US. He's got a fascinating story. He's written a great book. Yeah, we're going to be talking about the 3 most taboo subjects together. Do you know what I mean? So you can't get more. I don't know if LinkedIn's ready for it, but we're going to bring it anyway. So I'll be back next Tuesday at 6 o'clock. Please go and look up Leroy. Go and look at his website. Please go and check out his book and just keep supporting, you know. So I'm always appreciative of your support. Can I say Happy New Year? I know it doesn't feel like it, but I'm going to wish you Happy New Year anyway. Thanks so much, everyone, and I'll see you soon. Bye.